Part 1. The boarding. The RMS Titanic gleamed like a jeweled palace against the gray Southampton docks on that crisp April morning in 1912. Among the throngs of passengers, wealthy aristocrats in silk and fur, immigrant families clutching worn suitcases, businessmen with leather portfolios, one figure moved with peculiar grace through the crowds. Sebastian Thorne appeared to be a gentleman of perhaps 35 years, though his true age numbered in the centuries. His pale skin, which he attributed to a scholarly life spent indoors, contrasted sharply with his coal-black hair and penetrating gray eyes. He wore an impeccably tailored suit, carried a silver-topped walking cane, and traveled with only a single large trunk that he insisted on handling himself, much to the porter's confusion. "First class, sir?" asked a White Star Line steward. The first-class accommodations exceeded even his expectations. His cabin, though not the grandest aboard, offered privacy and comfort. Most importantly, it connected through an interior door to an adjacent room he had also booked under a false name of precaution that had served him well over the centuries. Sebastian unpacked his few belongings, several changes of clothing, a leather journal filled with his cramped handwriting in languages both living and dead, and various items carefully wrapped in velvet cloth. The trunk had a false bottom, naturally. What lay beneath would have horrified the White Star Line staff. A knock at the door interrupted his arrangement of the cabin. "Mr. Thorne, I'm your steward, James McCarthy. Anything you need during the voyage, just ring." "Excellent. That will be all for now." As the steward departed, Sebastian allowed himself a slight smile. The boy would be useful, though not for feeding. Sebastian had rules, cultivated over centuries of survival. Never kill aboard ship bodies, raise too many questions. Never feed from the same victim twice in close succession. Never draw attention. Never leave witnesses who could articulate what they'd seen. He had broken these rules only once, in 1867, aboard a clipper ship from Singapore. The resulting panic and subsequent investigation had nearly destroyed him. He would not make that mistake again. The ship's departure that afternoon drew Sebastian to the promenade deck, where he stood among the other passengers watching England recede into the distance. The air smelled of salt water, coal smoke, and human sweat, so many humans packed into this floating palace. Magnificent, isn't she? Sebastian turned to find a woman beside him, perhaps 50, wearing a deep purple dress and an elaborate hat adorned with peacock feathers. Her jewelry suggested old money, and her bearing spoke of generations of privilege. "Indeed, madam. The pinnacle of human achievement, they say. Mrs. Evelyn Worthington," she introduced herself. "Of the Boston Worthingtons, and you are?" "Sebastian Thorne." "A pleasure." He took her offered hand and kissed it lightly, careful not to let his lips linger on the pulse point at her wrist. "Are you traveling for business or pleasure, Mr. Thorne?" "A bit of both. I'm a collector of antiquities. There's an estate sale in New York that promises some interesting items." "And yourself?" "Returning home after visiting my sister in London. Such a tedious journey, really, but this ship makes it almost bearable. Have you dined in the first-class restaurant yet?" "The food is supposedly extraordinary." Sebastian smiled. "I'm afraid I have rather specific dietary requirements. I often take my meals in my cabin." "How unfortunate." "Well, you must at least join us in the smoking room for brandy after dinner. It's where all the interesting people gather." "Perhaps I shall." More intriguing than her appearance was her scent. It carried something different from the other passengers, something that set his centuries-old instincts humming with both attraction and wariness. Not quite human, though not vampire either. Something else entirely. The woman turned, met his gaze directly, and held it without the usual discomfort mortals displayed when confronted with predatory attention. Then she smiled a knowing, mysterious expression and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of passengers. Sebastian stood immobile for a long moment, aware that his carefully planned voyage had just become significantly more complicated. That evening, Sebastian dressed carefully for dinner, though he had no intention of eating. Appearances mattered in first class, and he had learned long ago that eccentric behavior was tolerated as long as one maintained the proper social veneer. Sebastian found himself seated at a table with Mrs. Worthington, a railroad magnate named John B. Thayer, a young honeymoon couple whose names he immediately forgot, and to his surprise, the mysterious woman from the deck. "Mr. Thorne," Mrs. Worthington announced grandly, "may I introduce Miss Catherine Brennan? She's traveling as companion to the Countess of Rothus, though the dear Countess is indisposed this evening." "A pleasure, Miss Brennan." Sebastian inclined his head. "Mr. Thorne." Her voice was low, musical, with a faint Irish lilt. Those amber eyes studied him with disturbing intensity. "Mrs. Worthington tells me you're a collector of antiquities. How fascinating. What periods interest you most?" "I tend toward the medieval, particularly items from Eastern Europe." "Ah, Romania? Hungary, such dark histories in those regions, indeed. Though I find darkness often conceals the most interesting truths." The waiter arrived with the first course of oysters on ice. Sebastian made a show of consuming one, though the taste of anything other than blood had long ago turned to ash in his mouth. He would excuse himself shortly, claiming illness, and retreat to his cabin. But Catherine Brennan's presence complicated that plan. She continued to watch him throughout the meal, even as she maintained polite conversation with the other diners. When he declined course after course, citing a delicate stomach, she smiled that knowing smile again. At precisely 11 o'clock, Sebastian climbed the stairs to the boat deck. The wind had picked up and most passengers had retreated to the warmth of the public rooms. The deck was nearly deserted, lit only by the ship's running lights and the cold stars overhead. Catherine Brennan stood at the forward railing, her cloak whipping around her like wings. "You came," she said without turning. "I wasn't certain you would. Your invitation was rather intriguing. As are you, Miss Brennan." Sebastian approached cautiously. "What exactly are you?" She turned to face him, and in the dim light, her eyes seemed to glow with their own luminescence. "The question, Mr. Thorne, or should I say Mr. Blackwood, or perhaps Count Draculefti. You've used so many names over the years, is what are you?" Sebastian's hand moved to the silver-topped cane, which concealed a blade. "I don't know what you're suggesting. Don't insult my intelligence. I know what you are, vampire. Just as you've no doubt sensed, I'm not entirely human myself. If you know what I am, then you know the danger of confronting me." Catherine laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. "Oh, I'm not confronting you. I'm offering you a partnership. I work alone. Not this time. You see, there's something aboard this ship. Something old and hungry and far more dangerous than a solitary vampire trying to maintain his feeding schedule without attracting attention." She moved closer. "Tell me, have you noticed anything unusual? Any passengers who seem off?" Sebastian considered lying, then reconsidered. The ship's manifest listed 2,224 souls aboard. But my count has consistently come up one higher. 2,225. Someone who doesn't appear in any cabin records, who moves through the ship without being seen by the crew, who leaves no trace except a steadily growing sense of unease. Exactly. And yesterday, a third-class passenger named Peter Dahl went missing. The crew is calling it an accident, assuming he fell overboard drunk, but I examined his cabin. There was blood, Mr. Thorne. Not much, but enough. And the pattern suggested something fed from him before disposing of the body. Another vampire? No, worse. Have you heard of the strigoi? Sebastian's expression darkened. Romanian folklore. The undead, yes, but different from our kind. Mindless, ravenous. They kill when they feed, and they can't stop feeding. Not folklore, very real. And one of them is aboard the Titanic, probably brought across in someone's luggage in its dormant state. The motion and warmth of the ship would have awakened it. Now it's hunting. And you know this because I'm a Dhampir, half vampire, half human. My father was one of your kind. My mother was his human familiar. I inherited certain abilities from both. I can sense supernatural creatures. I'm stronger and faster than humans. I can walk in daylight. But I also need blood, though not as much as you. I've spent my life hunting the things that prey on humanity. Sebastian studied her carefully. Dhampirs were rare, and he'd only encountered 2 in his 3 centuries of undeath. Both had tried to kill him. Why should I believe you? And even if you're telling the truth, why would I help you? Because if a strigoi goes into a feeding frenzy among 2,200 passengers, the resulting panic and carnage will expose all of us. The survivors will speak of monsters. They'll start looking for monsters. And they'll find you, Mr. Thorne, no matter how careful you've been. The age of hiding in shadows is ending. There are too many people now, too many cameras, too much scrutiny. This ship is a powder keg, and the strigoi is the match. She had a point, and Sebastian knew it. What do you propose? We find it before it kills again. We destroy it. Then we go our separate ways. You to your antiquities collection, me to my next hunt. And if I refuse, then I'll hunt it myself. And if the ship descends into chaos, I'll make certain the investigators know exactly which cabin houses an ancient vampire. Her smile was cold. Don't mistake my offer for weakness, Mr. Thorne. I'm giving you a choice because we'll be more effective together. But make no mistake, I will see this through. Sebastian was silent for a long moment, listening to the throb of the ship's engines, the rush of water along the hull, the distant sound of music from the first-class lounge. Then he nodded. Very well, Miss Brennan. We have an accord. Where do we begin? Part 2. The Hunt. The next morning found Sebastian in the ship's library, a quiet sanctuary of dark wood paneling and leather-bound books. Despite his nocturnal nature, he'd forced himself to rise early, or what passed for early in his existence. The library was nearly empty at this hour, with only a few passengers browsing the shelves. Catherine Brennan entered precisely at 9, as they'd arranged. She wore a navy walking dress and carried a notebook, the picture of a proper lady's companion engaged in research for her employer. Good morning, Mr. Thorne. I trust you slept well? Her voice carried the right tone of polite distance for any observers, as well as can be expected. And yourself? Tolerably. She settled into the chair across from him, opening her notebook. To anyone watching, they appeared to be engaged in casual conversation. I spent the night investigating the lower decks. There was another incident. Sebastian's expression remained neutral, but his grip on his book tightened. Tell me, a stoker named William McGregor, found dead in the boiler room this morning, throat torn out. The crew is saying it was an industrial accident, that he got caught in some machinery. But I saw the body before they moved it. The wounds are identical to what killed the third-class passenger. The strigoi is escalating. Yes, it fed 2 nights ago, then again last night. The hunger is building. Soon it won't be able to stop at 1 victim per night. Catherine consulted her notes. I've been reviewing the passenger lists and crew manifests, looking for anomalies. Anyone who boarded late, anyone traveling under unusual circumstances, any luggage that seemed suspicious. And 17 possibilities, but one stands out. A Count Valerian Petrova, traveling alone in first class. He boarded in Cherbourg with 3 large trunks, all of which he insisted on handling himself, much like you. He hasn't been seen since boarding, takes all his meals in his cabin, refuses maid service. That describes half the eccentrics in first class, myself included. True, but when I asked the steward about him, the man couldn't provide any clear description. Height, hair color, age all vague. It's as if the memory slides away. Catherine leaned forward. That's the mark of a very old creature using compulsion to hide itself. Your kind can do it too, though usually not so effectively. Sebastian nodded slowly. I'll investigate Count Petrova, discreetly. If he is what we fear, confronting a strigoi in its lair is dangerous even for our kind, which is why we'll do it together tonight. In the meantime, I'm going to place protections on the third-class areas. They're the most vulnerable, crowded, poorly lit, with passengers who won't be missed immediately. Protections? Catherine pulled a small vial from her bag. Holy water, blessed by a priest who knew exactly what he was blessing it for. Won't stop a strigoi, but it will burn them, mark them. I'm going to sprinkle it at key entrance points. If our creature tries to hunt in third class again, it'll carry the mark when it retreats. Clever, though won't the passengers notice a strange woman wandering their decks? I have a cover. The Countess has a passion for missionary work. I'm delivering religious pamphlets and comfort to the poor souls in steerage. Very charitable, very proper. She stood. Meet me outside cabin A14 at midnight. That's Count Petrova's cabin. Bring whatever weapons you have. Miss Brennan, Catherine, if this goes wrong, then we both die, and the strigoi continues its rampage until the ship is a floating graveyard. So let's make sure it doesn't go wrong. She left the library, her posture that of a dutiful companion on her employer's errands. Sebastian watched her go, admiring her pragmatism even as he wondered if he could trust her. Dhampirs were legendary hunters of the undead. This could still be an elaborate trap to destroy him. But he'd survived 3 centuries by trusting his instincts. And his instincts, said Catherine Brennan, was exactly what she claimed to be. A hunter who recognized that some prey required cooperation to bring down. Sebastian spent the day in careful preparation. From his trunk's false bottom, he withdrew items that had served him well over the years. A wooden stake, ashwood, blessed by a Romanian Orthodox priest in 1847. A silver knife with a blade inscribed with protective prayers in Latin. A small bottle of holy water, though touching it caused his skin to sting even through the glass. A leather cord strung with cloves of garlic, uncomfortable for him to carry, but potentially lethal to a strigoi. He also prepared a cover story. If anyone asked, he was an antiquarian who'd heard Count Petrova might have items for sale from old European estates. A legitimate reason for a late-night visit. As the sun set and the ship's evening routines began, Sebastian made his way through the first-class areas, observing the passengers at their leisure. The rich played cards in the smoking room, took tea in the Café Parisien, strolled the decks in their evening finery. They had no idea that predators moved among them. In the main dining saloon, he forced himself to attend dinner, maintaining appearances. Mrs. Worthington held court at the table, gossiping about the other passengers. That Count Petrova is causing quite a stir, she announced. Or rather, his absence is. No one has seen him since Cherbourg. The poor dear must be terribly seasick. Has anyone checked on his welfare? Asked Mr. Thayer. His steward delivers meals, but the Count never answers the door. Simply leaves a note requesting the food be left outside. Most irregular. Sebastian's attention sharpened. Perhaps someone should verify he's well. On a ship like this, medical emergencies can be dangerous. The ship's doctor visited this morning, untold, but Count Petrova refused to open the door. Insisted through the door that he was fine and wished to be left alone. Mrs. Worthington lowered her voice conspiratorially. I suspect he's either hideously disfigured or engaged in some scandalous affair. Why else would a titled gentleman hide himself so completely? If only you knew, Sebastian thought, how close to the truth you are. Catherine was absent from dinner, presumably completing her protections in the third-class areas. Sebastian excused himself early, claiming fatigue, and retreated to his cabin to wait for midnight. The ship's sounds became familiar to him, the throb of engines, the creak of wood and metal, the distant laughter and music from the public rooms, the splash of waves against the hull. He'd traveled by ship many times over the centuries, but never on anything as grand as the Titanic. The irony wasn't lost on him, hiding from the sun aboard a vessel that claimed to be unsinkable, hunting a creature even more dangerous than himself. At 11:45, he gathered his weapons, concealing them in various pockets and beneath his coat. Then he made his way to a deck where the most luxurious cabins housed the wealthiest passengers. Catherine was already waiting, dressed in dark clothing more practical than her daytime attire. You're late. I'm early. You're simply earlier. Have you seen any crew? The night stewards are on duty, but they're mostly in the servant areas. This section is quiet. They approached cabin of 14 cautiously. The door looked no different from any other first-class cabin door, polished wood with brass fittings. A small nameplate reading Count V. Petrova. Catherine pressed her ear to the door. I hear movement inside. Someone's awake, or something. Sebastian withdrew his silver knife. How do you want to proceed? Direct approach. Knock, claim you're delivering a message. When he opens the door, we force entry. And if he doesn't open, then we break it down and deal with the consequences. Sebastian knocked firmly. Count Petrova? Message from the purser's office. Silence. He knocked again, louder. The voice that answered came from very close to the door, though they'd heard no footsteps approach. Leave it outside. I'm indisposed. The voice was wrong, hollow, echoing like wind through a tomb. Catherine met Sebastian's eyes and nodded. He put his shoulder to the door while she braced against him, adding her Dhampir strength. The lock gave with a crack of splintering wood. The cabin was dark, curtains drawn, lit only by a single candle. The air smelled of old earth, decay, and beneath that, the copper tang of blood. Expensive luggage stood open, revealing not clothing but soil-dark, rich earth from some distant grave. And in the corner, rising from a crouch, was the strigoi. It had once been human, but death and dark transformation had warped it into something else. Skin like parchment stretched over bones, eyes that glowed red in the dim light, fingers that ended in black claws. Its mouth opened in a hiss, revealing teeth filed to points, stained dark with old blood. Well, Sebastian said calmly, raising his knife, I suppose Count Petrova won't be joining us for dinner. The strigoi lunged with inhuman speed. Sebastian dodged left while Catherine moved right, both instinctively flanking the creature. It was faster than a newly turned vampire, faster than a Dhampir, nearly as fast as Sebastian himself. One claw caught his coat, shredding the fabric as he spun away. Catherine had her own weapons out, now a silver chain in one hand, a stake in the other. She whipped the chain at the strigoi's legs, trying to entangle it. The creature leaped clear, impossibly high, landing on the cabin's ornate ceiling fixture. The chandelier swung wildly but held. It's older than I thought, Catherine gasped. Centuries old, more powerful. The strigoi dropped, aiming for Sebastian. He met it with the silver knife, the blessed blade slicing across its shoulder. The creature shrieked, a sound like tearing metal, and black ichor spurted from the wound. It wasn't enough to slow it. They fought in desperate silence, aware that any loud commotion would bring crew and passengers. The strigoi seemed to understand this as well, limiting its vocalizations to hisses and snarls. Sebastian felt its claws rake across his ribs, tearing through flesh. The pain was intense. He'd forgotten what real pain felt like, but he'd survived worse. He grabbed the creature's arm and used its own momentum to slam it into the cabin wall. Expensive wood paneling cracked. Catherine leaped onto the strigoi's back, her chain wrapping around its throat. It bucked and twisted, trying to shake her off. Sebastian drove his stake toward its chest, but the creature caught his wrist with shocking strength. For a moment, they were frozen in a tableau of struggling forms. The strigoi's free hand reached back, caught Catherine's hair, and flung her across the room. She crashed into the luggage, scattering earth across the floor. The creature turned its full attention to Sebastian, and he found himself staring into those burning red eyes. This was no mindless monster. Intelligence lurked there, cruel and ancient. Vampire, it rasped in a language Sebastian hadn't heard in 200-years-old Romanian. You dare hunt me? You're bringing attention to our kind, Sebastian replied in the same tongue. You'll expose us all. Our kind? I am nothing like you, civilized creature. I am what we were meant to be, pure hunger, glorious death. Its grip on his wrist tightened, bones grinding together. I was ancient when your sire was born. I drank from Vlad Gapek himself before he knew what his own death would bring. And I will feast on this ship until the ocean runs red. Catherine had recovered. She came at the strigoi from behind with her stake, but the creature sensed her. It released Sebastian and spun, catching her throat in one clawed hand. It lifted her off the ground, her feet kicking as she struggled. "Half-breed," it sneered. "Abomination, neither living nor dead. You should never have been born." Sebastian saw the creature's mouth opening, preparing to tear out Catherine's throat. He didn't think, just acted. His silver knife flashed, severing the strigoi's arm at the elbow. The limb fell away, still clutching Catherine's throat. She tore it free, gasping, as the strigoi howled in rage and pain. Black ichor sprayed from the stump. The creature stumbled, and Sebastian saw his opportunity. He drove the ash stake through the strigoi's back, angling for the heart. The wood sank deep, and the creature convulsed, but it didn't fall. Instead, it turned to face him, the stake protruding from its chest. "Fool," it hissed. "You think I'm some newly risen corpse? I've survived stakes before. I've survived fire, holy water, exorcism. I survived the Inquisition itself." But Catherine had grabbed the vial of holy water from Sebastian's coat. She uncapped it and flung the contents directly into the strigoi's face. The effect was immediate and horrifying. The blessed water burned like acid where it struck. The creature's face began to melt, skin sloughing off bone, eyes boiling in their sockets. It screamed, no longer caring about stealth, and clawed at its own face. Sebastian saw their chance. He grabbed the protruding stake and drove it deeper, pushing with all his preternatural strength. Catherine added her own power, both of them forcing the wood through the strigoi's heart until it punched through the creature's chest. The strigoi's scream cut off. It stood frozen for a heartbeat, then began to crumble. The centuries caught up with it all at once. Flesh turned to dust, bones to powder. In seconds, nothing remained but a pile of ash and the discarded stake. Catherine slumped against the wall, her throat bruised, her hands shaking. Well, that was unpleasant. Sebastian examined his torn ribs. They were already healing, but the coat was ruined. The oldest strigoi I've ever encountered. I didn't think they could survive that long. They can't, usually. Something was sustaining it. Probably periodic feedings. She nudged the pile of ash with her boot. "We need to clean this up. Dispose of the evidence." They worked quickly. The earth-filled luggage was dumped overboard from a deserted section of deck. The ash was scattered to the wind. They straightened the cabin as best they could, though the broken door and damaged walls would raise questions. "We'll claim we found it like this," Catherine decided. Count Petrova clearly had enemies who discovered his location. "We investigated noises and found the cabin ransacked." The Count vanished. Not unusual for a titled European to have made enemies. It was a thin story, but it would have to suffice. They were preparing to leave when Catherine spotted something in the corner, a leather journal, partially hidden under the bed. She opened it, then froze. "Sebastian, you need to see this." The journal was in Romanian, written in archaic dialect. But the sketches were clear enough. Diagrams of a ship, the Titanic, and notes about passengers' names, cabin numbers, routines. The strigoi had been planning its feeding schedule. But that wasn't what had made Catherine pale. She showed him the final entry, dated 2 days ago. "I sense a brother nearby, another of the night cursed. He will try to stop me, I know this. They always do, the civilized ones who think they can hide among the cattle. He doesn't yet realize the truth, that this ship is doomed. I've seen it in my dreams, the visions that come with true undeath. Ice and water and screaming thousands. When the ship goes down in the chaos, I will feed freely. And if the civilized vampire tries to stop me, he will die with all the rest." Sebastian felt a chill that had nothing to do with his cold blood. Dreams and visions aren't reliable. The creature was mad. Maybe, but strigoi sometimes develop prophetic abilities. It's rare, but documented. Catherine closed the journal. "We should destroy this." "No, keep it. If the impossible happens, if the ship is in danger, we may need to know everything the creature knew." They heard footsteps in the corridor, the night steward making his rounds. They slipped out of the cabin separately. Catherine heading to the servants' stairs, Sebastian returning to his own cabin by a different route. Once alone, Sebastian removed his ruined coat and examined his wounds. They were healing, but slowly. The strigoi had been powerful indeed. He poured himself a glass of wine from the room's decanter, not because he enjoyed the taste, but because the ritual was comforting. The creature's final words haunted him, a doomed ship. Ice and water, impossible, surely. The Titanic was unsinkable, everyone said so. The finest engineers and the latest technology had made it so. And yet, Sebastian had lived long enough to know that hubris often preceded disaster. He'd seen kingdoms fall, armies destroyed, impossible catastrophes unfold with terrible regularity. He moved to the porthole and looked out at the dark ocean. Somewhere out there, in the black water, was ice. The ship had posted warnings about icebergs in the area. The captain had changed course to avoid the ice fields. Everything would be fine. Sebastian tried to believe it. Part 3. Warnings from the Deep. The death of Count Petrova caused only a minor stir. The official story that the Count's cabin had been found ransacked and empty spread through first class, with the speed of all good gossip. Theories ranged from a business rival settling old scores to a scandalous elopement with a married woman. The truth, of course, was far stranger and far more terrible. Sebastian spent the following day in his cabin, allowing his wounds to fully heal. Catherine visited once, bringing tea for her and recent newspapers for show. The crew found the stoker's body, she reported quietly. They're calling it an accident. The captain doesn't want to cause panic. Understandable if misguided. Are there any other incidents? Not that I can find. I think the strigoi was responsible for both deaths. We may have eliminated the threat. She paused. Though that journal still troubles me. Ancient creatures often go mad. Their minds can't handle centuries of existence. The visions were likely hallucinations. Perhaps. Catherine didn't sound convinced. But I'd feel better if we remained vigilant until we reach New York. Agreed. Though I confess, I'm not sure what we'd be watching for. That answer came at 11:40 p.m. On April 14th, Sebastian was in the smoking room, maintaining his facade of normalcy by losing moderate amounts of money at cards with John B. Thayer and several other first-class passengers. The room was warm, filled with cigar smoke and masculine laughter. Outside the windows, the night was perfectly clear, the ocean calm as glass. Then the ship shuddered. It wasn't dramatic, just a faint grinding vibration that ran through the floor. The card players paused, looking at each other. What was that? Someone asked. Probably dropped a propeller blade, another suggested. Happens all the time, but Sebastian knew better. His heightened senses had caught something else beneath the vibration. The sound of tearing metal, the groan of stressed hull plates, and beneath that, the rush of water where no water should be. He stood abruptly. Gentlemen, excuse me. I'm feeling unwell. On deck, other passengers were emerging, curious about the disturbance. Some carried chunks of ice that had fallen on the forward well deck. They laughed, throwing snowballs, treating it as a novelty. Sebastian grabbed a passing steward. What happened? Nothing to worry about, sir. We may have brushed an iceberg, just a bit of ice on the forward deck. Please return to your cabin. But Sebastian could hear it, now the sound of water pouring into the ship's lower compartments. Tons of water, thousands of gallons, flooding into spaces that should be sealed and dry. His supernatural hearing picked up the shouts of crew members below, the clang of watertight doors closing, the rising panic in voices that tried to remain calm. He found Catherine on the boat deck. She'd clearly been running, her hair was disheveled, her face pale. The Strigoi's vision, she gasped. It's happening. We've hit an iceberg. I heard the crew, the ship is taking on water in 5 compartments. They say she can survive 4, but not 5. The Titanic is unsinkable, Sebastian said. But even he didn't believe the words. She's sinking. Not quickly, but inevitably. We have perhaps 2 hours, maybe less. Catherine gripped his arm. We need to get to the lifeboats. There aren't enough lifeboats. I saw them when I boarded, Perhaps 20 boats for over 2,000 people. Then we get to them first. We're first class, they'll prioritize us. Sebastian looked at her, this woman who'd spent her life hunting monsters. You would abandon all these people? What choice do we have? We can't save them all. We can't even reveal what we are to help them. It would cause more panic. Her amber eyes were anguished. I don't want them to die, but I want to live. Don't you? He did. God help him, he did. 3 centuries of existence, and he still clung to the shadow of life with desperate hunger. But he'd also seen enough death to know its weight. We can save some, he said slowly. Not all, but some. The third-class passengers, they're locked below decks by gates meant to separate classes. The crew won't open those gates until it's too late. But we can. Sebastian, I'm not asking you to die, Catherine. Get to a lifeboat. You're partly human, you belong among the living. But I'm going below. I'm going to open those gates. Maybe a few more will survive because of it. You'll be trapped down there when the ship goes under. Even you can't survive drowning. I'm already dead. Perhaps this is the death I was always meant to have. He smiled, surprising himself with the peace he felt. 300 years is a long time to run from the grave. Catherine stared at him, then cursed in Gaelic. You're an idiot. A noble idiot, but still an idiot. She pulled a key from her pocket. She'd picked it from a steward earlier that day. The gates use a master lock. This should open most of them. And I'm coming with you. Catherine, don't argue. I may be part human, but I'm also part monster. And monsters should stick together, especially at the end of the world. They moved through the ship as it began its death throes. Around them, passengers were still largely unaware. The band played in the first-class lounge. People joked about the iceberg. A few had noticed the ship listing to one side, but most assumed it was temporary. The officers knew better. Sebastian heard them in the radio room, sending distress signals. CQD, SOS. We have struck an iceberg, sinking by the head. In steerage, the situation was different. The third-class passengers knew something was wrong. Water was rising in their compartments. But the gates to the upper decks remained locked regulations, they were told. Wait for instructions. Sebastian and Catherine reached the first gate at 12:15 a.m. Beyond it, dozens of people pressed against the metal barrier, families with children, young couples, old men and women, who'd sold everything for passage to America. Stand back, Sebastian ordered, his voice carrying the weight of command that 3 centuries had taught him. The crowd fell back. Catherine inserted the key and turned it. The gate swung open. Follow us, Catherine told them. Quickly and quietly, head to the boat deck. Stay together. They moved through the ship, opening gate after gate, releasing hundreds of third-class passengers. Not all, some sections were already flooded, some gates hopelessly jammed, but enough. Enough that Sebastian felt he might die with less weight on his conscience. At 1 a.m., the bow was clearly sinking. Water lapped at the forward well deck. The crew had finally begun loading the lifeboats, but with catastrophic inefficiency. Boats meant to hold 65 people were launched half-empty because no one believed the ship was really sinking. Sebastian saw Mrs. Worthington helped into a boat, her face pale but dignified. He saw John Thayer and his wife separated, women and children first, the officers insisted. He saw families torn apart, lovers forced apart, children crying for their fathers. And he saw Catherine standing by Lifeboat 6, where an officer was trying to force her aboard. I can row, she was arguing. You need strong backs in the boats. Let me help. Women and children first, miss. No exceptions. I'm not leaving, she said, and met Sebastian's eyes across the chaos. The ship shuddered again, the bow dipping lower. The angle of the deck was becoming pronounced. In the distance, Sebastian could see rockets being fired into the sky, distress signals, beautiful and terrible. He made his way to her. You should go. Should. But won't. She smiled, and he saw no fear in her face. I told you monsters stick together. At 2 a.m., The forward funnel collapsed, crushing dozens in the water and on the deck. The ship's stern rose from the ocean, screws and rudder emerging into the air like the ribs of a dying beast. People clung to railings, to each other, to hope. Sebastian and Catherine found themselves at the stern rail with hundreds of others. The band had stopped playing. The lifeboats were gone, those few that had been launched, pitifully inadequate against the scale of the disaster. "I'm sorry," Sebastian said. "Sorry that your hunt ends like this. I've had a good run. Killed 12 vampires, 7 werewolves, 3 demons, and 1 ancient strigoi. Not bad for 30 years of work." Catherine took his hand. "Strange to find companionship at the end with one of the creatures I'd normally hunt. You're not what I expected either. When I boarded this ship, I thought I'd have a pleasant voyage, perhaps feed carefully from a passenger or two, and arrive in New York unnoticed. I never imagined that you'd meet at Dhampir, fight a monster, save hundreds of lives, and go down with the ship." Catherine laughed. "Life's funny, or unlife in your case." The stern rose higher, the angle approaching vertical. People began sliding down the deck, tumbling into the water below. The screams were terrible hundreds, thousands of voices crying out in terror and despair. At 2:20 a.m., the ship broke apart. The stress was too much for the hull. With a sound like the world ending, the Titanic split in two just forward of the third funnel. The stern settled back into the water for a moment, floating almost level. False hope surged through the survivors still aboard. Then the stern began to rise again, faster now, pulled down by the flooded bow section. Sebastian felt the deck tilting vertical beneath his feet. Catherine's hand slipped from his as they both lost their grip. They fell together into the black water. The cold was absolute, even for a vampire, even for someone whose body no longer generated heat. The freezing North Atlantic was agony. Sebastian felt his limbs growing sluggish, his thoughts slowing. Around him, hundreds of people screamed and thrashed, their cries gradually fading as hypothermia claimed them. The lifeboats were distant points of light, too far away, rowing away from the drowning masses for fear of being swamped. Sebastian dove deep, trying to escape the chaos above. The Titanic's broken stern section descended past him, a mountain of twisted metal sinking into the abyss. Bodies tumbled past stewards, passengers, crew, all equal in death. His lungs, which no longer needed air but still felt the instinct to breathe, burned with phantom pain. His vision dimmed. For the first time in 3 centuries, Sebastian felt true mortality approaching. Then a hand grabbed his collar. Catherine, somehow still conscious, somehow still strong, was dragging him upward. Her Dhampir nature, half living, half dead, allowed her to endure what would have killed any full human. She broke the surface, hauling Sebastian with her. "Breathe!" She gasped, though she knew he didn't need to. The command was instinctive. They found a piece of debris, part of a door or wall panel, large enough to support 1 person, maybe 2 if they were careful. Catherine pushed Sebastian onto it. "Hold on," she commanded. Around them, the screams were fading. The hundreds in the water were dying, one by one, victims of the cold. The ship was gone. Both sections sunk into the depths. Only debris and corpses remained, floating in a field of ice under the brilliant stars. Catherine clung to the edge of the debris, her lips already blue, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. "You were right," she said, "about saving people. We gave them a chance. Some of them made it to the boats because of us." "You're dying," Sebastian said. "Yes, the cold. Too much for my human half to endure. I could save you, if you let me turn you fully. Vampire, not Dhampir. You'd survive the cold." Catherine considered this for a long moment. "No, thank you, but no. I've spent my life fighting monsters. I won't become one, not even to survive. You're not a monster. Neither are you, I think. Not really. Not anymore." Her grip on the debris was weakening. "Tell me something, Sebastian. In 300 years, what was the best thing you saw?" He thought about this, his mind sorting through centuries of memories. Venice, 1786. I was hiding from the sun in a cathedral, and I heard a girl singing. She was maybe 16, practicing for a performance. Her voice was transcendent. For those moments, I remembered what it felt like to be human. To hear beauty and be moved by it. That's good. Hold on to that. Catherine's eyes were starting to close. Hold on to the beauty. Not the blood, not the hunting. The beauty. Catherine, don't. It's all right, I'm ready. She smiled one last time. Besides, someone needs to keep hunting monsters in the afterlife, right? Probably a whole new set of problems up there. Her hand slipped from the debris. Sebastian lunged for her, but she was already gone, sinking into the dark water. He stared at the spot where she'd vanished, and for the first time in 3 centuries, he felt something like tears wanting to come. But vampires couldn't cry. He clung to the debris as the night wore on. More screens faded, more lives ended. The cold was unbearable, even for him. His body began shutting down, entering a kind of torpor to preserve itself. Distantly he heard an engine, a ship's horn. The Carpathia, finally arriving, too late for all but those in the lifeboats. Rescue boats prowled the debris field, looking for survivors. They found hundreds of bodies. They found 4 people still alive in the water, including Charles Joan, the ship's baker, who'd somehow survived in the freezing water for over 2 hours. They did not find Sebastian Thorne. Epilogue. Adrift, Sebastian drifted for 3 days. His body, locked in torpor, floated on the debris through icy waters. Ships passed in the distance, but didn't spot him. The cold preserved him, holding him in a state between death and undeath. On the 3rd day, a fishing vessel out of Halifax spotted what they thought was a corpse and hauled it aboard for proper burial. When they realized the corpse was still faintly warm, they brought it to the ship's cabin and tried to revive it. Sebastian woke at sunset, to the shock of the fishermen. He was weak, nearly mindless with hunger, and it took all his willpower not to feed on his rescuers. Instead, he compelled them, gently, carefully, to take him to shore and forget they'd found him. He made his way to New York by various means, arriving 2 weeks after the Titanic had sunk. The newspapers were full of the disaster. Lists of the dead and saved. Testimonies from survivors. Investigations into why so many had perished. He read that Mrs. Worthington had survived. That John Thayer had died, along with his son. That over 1,500 people had gone down with the ship or perished in the water. He read the name Catherine Brennan on the list of casualties, companion to the Countess of Rothes, lost at sea. No body recovered. In his room at a modest hotel, Sebastian opened the journal he'd saved from the Strigoi's cabin. He'd kept it with him, waterproofed in an oilskin pouch, through the sinking and the days adrift. On a blank page at the back he wrote, her name was Catherine Brennan. She was a Dhampir, a hunter of monsters, and one of the bravest souls I have known in 3 centuries. She died saving my life and others on a cold April night in the North Atlantic. She deserves to be remembered as more than a name on a list of casualties. Then he wrote about the other lives he'd seen end that night, the families he'd freed from the locked gates, the crew members who'd stayed at their posts, the band that played until the end, the parents who'd put their children in lifeboats and stayed behind. He wrote through the night and into the next day, documenting what he'd witnessed. It was the least he could do, bear witness, remember, keep their stories alive even as his own life stretched endlessly forward. When he finished, Sebastian sealed the journal in a lockbox along with other artifacts from that night. A watch that had stopped at 2:20 a.m., a White Star Line boarding pass, a piece of wood from the debris that had saved his life. He would keep these items for decades, moving them from city to city, century to century, as he continued his long existence. He would feed carefully, never kill, always remember Catherine's words about beauty versus blood. And on April 15th of every year, as the anniversary of the sinking came around, he would take out the journal and read what he'd written. He would remember the hubris of humans building unsinkable ships. He would remember the courage of those who'd faced death with dignity. He would remember a Dhampir named Catherine, who'd shown him that monsters could still choose to be heroes. The years passed. The Titanic became legend, then history, then a story told to new generations who'd never known a world without airplanes and spacecraft, who thought of ocean liners as quaint relics of a bygone age. But Sebastian remembered. He always remembered. In 2012, on the centennial of the sinking, he stood on the deck of a ship sailing the same route. Other passengers gathered for a memorial service, throwing wreaths into the water above the wreck site, 2 miles below. An old woman approached him. She was perhaps 90, but her eyes were sharp and clear. "You were there, weren't you?" she asked softly. Sebastian turned to her, surprised. "I'm sorry?" "On the Titanic you were there, I can tell," she smiled. "I'm a great-granddaughter of one of the survivors. A third-class passenger named Anna Gallagher. She told stories about that night, about a well-dressed man and a woman who opened the gates, who saved hundreds of people who would have been trapped below. Your great-grandmother survived." "Yes, she made it to a lifeboat, married, had children. Lived to be 96. The old woman touched his arm. "She never knew their names, the ones who opened the gates. But she never forgot them. She made sure we didn't forget. That someone did something good, even at the end." Sebastian felt something in his chest, not his still heart, but something deeper. "Thank you for telling me. Thank you for being there." She walked away, leaving Sebastian at the rail. He looked down at the dark water and thought of Catherine, somewhere far below, her bones resting among the wreckage. "We saved some," he said softly to her memory. "Not all, but some. I hope that counts for something." The ship's bell rang, the time of the sinking, 2:20 a.m. Around him, passengers fell silent. A wreath was cast into the water. A prayer was spoken. And Sebastian Thorne, vampire, monster, witness, survivor, bowed his head and remembered. The next night, he returned to his cabin and took out the journal. On a new page he wrote, 100 years later, and the dead are still remembered, their stories still told. Perhaps that is enough. Perhaps that is all any of us can hope for, to be remembered. Not for what we were, but for what we chose to do when it mattered most. Catherine Brennan chose to save lives. I will honor her memory by doing the same, for however many centuries I have left. The blood is necessary for my survival, but it need not define me. She taught me that. Thank you, Catherine, for your courage, your compassion, and your friendship. I will make sure the stories survive. I will make sure you're remembered." He closed the journal and looked out the porthole at the endless ocean. Somewhere out there, beneath miles of water, the Titanic rested in eternal darkness. But above, in the light, lives continued. Stories were told. Memories endured. And in the shadows between life and death, a vampire who had learned to be something more than a monster smiled and turned his face to the sunrise, knowing he would survive it, knowing he would continue, carrying the weight of memory and the gift of one Dhampir's final lesson. Beauty over blood. Humanity over hunger. Memory over oblivion. These were the things worth preserving in the darkness. These were the reasons to go on. Sebastian Thorne had learned this on a cold April night in 1912, when the unsinkable ship sank and took with it any illusions he'd held about immortality, meaning safety. Death came for everyone, eventually, in one form or another. But before death, there was life, and choice, and the chance to be something better than the curse that had made you. That was worth 300 years. That was worth 300 more. He would remember, he would endure, and he would make sure that Catherine Brennan, Dhampir and hero, would never be forgotten.